There isn't much for second sons in Westeros. This is a theme that is hammered home fairly well in House of the Dragon by more than one character. Daemon Targaryen is one of, if not the prime example of this. Daemon is the second son of Prince Balon the Brave, the man who was named heir by the old King Jaehaerys himself. But after his father's sudden death, they needed to find someone else to inherit the throne after him. To solve this problem and hopefully prevent a war from breaking out over his decision, King Jaehaerys held a great council at Harrenhal for the Lords of the Realm to come and choose their next monarch. In the show, the main contenders for the title of heir were Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, the daughter of Daemon's uncle, Aemon, who was the firstborn son of old King Jaehaerys, but he died years earlier. The second candidate for this title was his older brother Viserys. Since Westeros heavily prefers men, his older brother was chosen as heir over their cousin, and with the death of old King Jaehaerys years later, Viserys became king, the first of his name. But the end of one issue was the start of another. As a king, one has a responsibility to produce heirs and secure their bloodline. For many years, Viserys and his wife Aemma tried and failed to produce a male heir to the kingdom. Their only child was a girl named Rhaenyra. Since Viserys had no true-born sons, then by all means, through tradition and precedent, Daemon was seen by many as the rightful heir to his brother. That is until Viserys finally had a son of his own named Balon, after their late father, but he died a few hours after he was born, making Daemon heir once again. But after making a joke that did not land well with his brother, he was effectively disinherited and replaced by his niece as his brother's heir. But his worries didn't end there, as eventually, after the death of his first wife, his brother married again, and produced even more children who pushed him even farther down the line of succession. In House of the Dragon, one thing that is easy to miss about Daemon as a character is that he's insecure. As a second son, Daemon has no real place in society. He's not like his older brother who essentially just gets handed things just because he was born. Daemon has to fight for his place in the world, fight to be seen, when all he has is a dragon and a sword. He does also have a wife earlier on in the series who is from a very well-respected family in the Vale, but they don't get along, to say the least. In the first episode of House of the Dragon, Daemon says this about Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King.
If I see Otto Hightower for what he is.
An unwavering and loyal hand.
A cunt!
A second son who stands to inherit nothing he doesn't seize for himself.
He uses this as a way to prove that Otto is untrustworthy. But what he fails to realize is that what he just said about Otto also is true for himself. The only merit Daemon has is what he makes and claims for himself. And this is echoed by another character in the series. Corlys Velaryon is the head of House Velaryon, a family that descends from old Valyria like the Targaryens, though they are not dragon riders. They're a wealthy family of seafarers, the wealthiest in the realm at this time, but despite their wealth and roots in Valyria and Westeros that may even be older than that of the Targaryens, they are overlooked in favor of the dragon-riding nobles, because it was the Targaryens, more accurately their forebear, Aegon the Conqueror, and his sisters, who united the realm under his dragon banner. Everyone remembers the Targaryen progenitor, but not many consider the mother of the conquering siblings was also a Velaryon, or that Velaryon soldiers and ships aided them in the conquest. All they care about are the big, scary lizards. And Corlys hates this, being overlooked. Like Daemon, despite not being a second son, he always seems to come in second to the Targaryen family. He's not taken seriously at times. His family is embarrassed and even ignored. Like the rogue prince, he had to make his own life. Nothing was handed to him. This is something he talks about with Daemon, the need to prove oneself, to make their worth known, made, because it is never given.
We are the realm's second sons, Damon. Our worth is not given. It must be made.
This kinship, this second son syndrome they seem to share, drives them to the Stepstones for a war against the Triarchy. The Stepstones are a key place for trade. Though they're basically uninhabited except for pirates here and there, all trade from Essos and some parts of Westeros has to pass through here. So with pirates inhabiting the islands and plundering passing ships, it's not a good look for those wanting to make a profit, especially Velaryons who make their money through trade. In canon, Corlys takes to the Stepstones to liberate it from the Triarchy and make their worth known. After a few years of war, they succeed, and Daemon is made king of the Narrow Sea for his efforts. But in spite of winning such honor and glory and having a title crafted just for him, Daemon decides to give it all up so he can go back into the good graces of his big brother, because that's all he really wanted, to be seen and acknowledged by him. But what if it wasn't? What if the rogue prince wanted more than to fight for the scraps of his brother's attention? More than being passed over in the line of succession and being married off to a woman he doesn't even like? What if Daemon didn't renounce the opportunity that was handed to him for a hug and a handshake? What if, instead of coveting the throne, he sought to build his own? What if Daemon kept his crown? This is an interesting idea that I thought of recently, and I think it's grounds for an interesting story should anyone decide to take it there. Daemon is a character who in the early parts of the series fought to be recognized by his family. The games he played were dangerous for himself and the people around him, but it didn't matter as long as he got the attention of those he desired. But what if he gave all that up and took his words for Otto and applied that to himself? He's a second son who seeks to inherit nothing but what he claims for himself. And after years of battle, they have claimed the Stepstones, not Viserys or his council or some other lord of Westeros, but Daemon and the Velaryons, who have just made him a king. The Stepstones are a chain of islands chained to no one, not Essos or Westeros, and Daemon as a second son is also not chained to anything himself. He has no real standing, no inheritance to step into of his own. So why not this? A man without a claim in an unclaimed land. After all the blood and sweat, Daemon finally decides he wants more. All of his life, he's just been moved around.
You've only ever tried to send me away to the Vale, to the City Watch, anywhere but by your side.
Moved from position to position, married off by his grandparents to a woman he doesn't even care for, disinherited by his own brother, and then replaced by a child, his niece. He has no place in Westeros, and he's tired of fighting for one. So he'll make his own. With Daemon deciding to stay king of the Narrow Sea and of the Stepstones, a lot is going to change. Obviously, the first change is that Daemon doesn't go back to Westeros. So that whole scene where he flies by Rhaenyra's boat and makes his entrance before giving up his crown does not happen. So after Rhaenyra cuts her tour short for the time being and heads home, we don't get that celebration party for Daemon in King's Landing. And if Daemon never comes back, this means that whole night they had in the brothel does not happen. So it's not reported to Otto, who then reports it to Viserys. Alicent never finds out about this through them and proceeds to confront Rhaenyra. And if the princess is never put on edge by Daemon, it's likely she does not sleep with Criston Cole. And if Daemon isn't around, he never lies about sleeping with Rhaenyra to Viserys. So she'll never have to drink that moon tea. This means that Larys won't be able to use this information to get in with a now lonely Alicent. And because that doesn't happen, she never interrogates Criston Cole. He never gets put on edge and decides to murder Joffrey Lonmouth. But I am getting ahead of myself. The point with all of this being said is that a lot of things got thrown out of whack the moment Daemon returned, like Rhaenyra's courtship. Because of her escapade with Daemon, Viserys ended her courtship prematurely, because she had exposed herself in a very dangerous way. No matter if she slept with him or not, how people perceived what happened was all that mattered.
Jaehaerys would have disinherited you.
For a lie? You've yet to ask me for the truth of what happened.
The truth does not matter, Rhaenyra. Only perception. You have exposed yourself. Now we must both suffer the consequences.
If Daemon never comes back, then chances are Rhaenyra's courtship does not end. While she left so abruptly and basically put it on pause, I do believe eventually, without any interference, she would go back on the market looking for a husband. So we get a fully fledged tour around the Seven Kingdoms for Princess Rhaenyra, and she most likely isn't forced to marry Laenor because of her bad decision-making skills, and because the Velaryons would most likely be in alliance with Daemon as he builds up the Stepstones. As mentioned earlier, the Stepstones are a chain of islands, and the biggest of these islands is a place called Bloodstone. I imagine this would be where Daemon makes his base of operations. This would be the place where he could house a dragon and start building his new kingdom. But that also provides an issue for the self-proclaimed king. Since Daemon has effectively abandoned Westeros for making a kingdom of his own, it's safe to say he doesn't have any substantial backing. The Velaryons may help out since Corlys did end up making a garrison on the Stepstones years later, and now having made a friend in alliance with a man who could actually hold the Stepstones might be beneficial to them. If they help Daemon hold the Stepstones, then they'd run less risk of pirates stealing from them, and holding the Stepstones could be very profitable for someone like Daemon if he can successfully hold them. He could monopolize on the trade that passes through it. The people of Westeros and Essos have to pass through the Stepstones if they want to trade with one another effectively. What's to stop Daemon from taxing the people who want to use his shipping lanes? Did traders want to find a longer, harsher route to get to where they want to go? Or fight a dragon when they could just cough up some gold? Now, this could make Daemon seem no better than a pirate king if he doesn't do things right. And I could very well see this causing issues in Westeros and Essos. I could definitely see Otto and the other members of the small council seeing Daemon going rogue as an issue. Holding the Stepstones could be bad because he could cripple trade through there, and perhaps amass people to go against them if he wanted. They would definitely start discussing plans to do something about him, but there isn't much that they can do about it legally because no one owns the Stepstones. Not Westeros or Essos. It's a Blake land that pretty much belongs to whoever can claim it. Daemon may be the king's brother, but he's never been one for rules, not that the Stepstones have any at this point. So they can't force him to give it up, as Viserys' words hold no weight, as Daemon isn't holding it for the crown. If they want him gone, they'd have to fight him for it. But knowing Viserys and how he deals with Daemon and honestly all of his problems, he'll just ignore it and assume it'll figure itself out somehow. Especially since it'll take a lot of time and friends for the Stepstones to actually become anything of note. Some lords of Westeros may be willing to help Daemon, seeing the possible advantage to having the King of the Narrow Sea on their side should he succeed, while others would probably just wait for Daemon to fail. He's definitely not going to get any support from the crown, not that he wants any, but I still say in this timeline, though he no longer wants to prove himself to Viserys, he still has a chip on his shoulder and wants to prove he can make a kingdom of his own. While the Velaryons will be of help, I think Daemon in this new timeline would go to Essos in the Free Cities to try and make some friends to help him in building up the islands. I mean, he does manage to get some kind of alliance going with the Prince of Pentos in the canon timeline. Who's to say that can't happen again here? Maybe to make his rule of the Stepstones more appealing, he'll present himself as more than a prince playing Pirate King, but portray himself as a protector. Pirates are one of the biggest issues on the Stepstones. What's the point of making a living off of trade if you have to worry about scurvy-ridden corsairs plundering you every chance they get? That was one of the main reasons they even fought the Triarchy, at least when it came to the Velaryons. To preserve trade, it'd be much more beneficial to support and pay a man, with a dragon mind you, to protect your goods than potentially get robbed of it for free. Maybe this notion would get Daemon the assistance he needs to build his new kingdom. And like a kingdom, like every monarch, Daemon will need a queen. Now, by this point, Daemon is still married to Rhaenyra, and she isn't dead since he hasn't gone back to King's Landing only to be exiled back to the Vale by his brother. It's no secret that he couldn't stand her and couldn't wait to get away from her. The death of Rhaenyra opened a lot of doors for Daemon to do what he wanted with whomever he wanted, with little backlash. But in this timeline, Rhaenyra is still alive and still very much married to Daemon. But I don't see this causing any issues for Daemon when it comes to finding a wife. Rhea being out there alive has never been much of a roadblock for him when it came to pursuing other women. I believe in this timeline, Daemon will still pursue Laena like he did in the canon one. He'll take a second wife as per Valyrian custom. Now, of course, this is going to be an issue back in Westeros when it comes to the faith. While they tolerate Targaryen incest, polyamory is hugely frowned upon. But this is also another benefit when it comes to the Stepstones. They don't fall under Westerosi custom and tradition, and now neither does Daemon since he's effectively broken off. As such, the faith's opinion doesn't really matter. Daemon can operate by Valyrian customs if he so wishes. In a way, the Stepstones could kinda be like Dorne. Dorne is considered the Seventh Kingdom despite never actually being subjugated by the Targaryens. They have their own customs and practices and still haven't conformed to the crown. Perhaps this could be another ally to Daemon. The Stepstones are close to Dorne. Maybe he could start some form of relationship with them considering their similar situations, just trying to do their own thing while other people try to say otherwise. Now, there probably would still be an issue with Daemon marrying Laena, that being her family, even if Daemon isn't based in Westeros, the Velaryons still are. They fall under the crown and the faith. His marriage to Rhaenyra most likely wouldn't be recognized by the faith, as the Stepstones, even if it is his own kingdom, would be too young to be truly respected, and even if Daemon is in the Stepstones, he is still a Westerosi prince, married to a Westerosi woman. Any children he has with Rhaenyra would be considered bastards because of this, as in the eyes of Westeros, it would be unlawful. And then, of course, that's not even considering, would Corlys and Rhaenys even allow this? I'm inclined to say yes because of how things turned out in canon. Rhaenyra married Daemon despite there not being much to gain from it. Daemon was way down there in terms of succession. He had no holdings, no lands of his own, or hope at an inheritance. Rhaenyra was little more than a political tool as well. She wasn't inheriting Driftmark, neither were her kids, and before Daemon came along, he was planning to marry her to the son of the Sea Lord of Braavos. I feel as long as Corlys sees some kind of advantage with allying with Daemon, I think he'd allow the marriage, especially since the faith would hold no weight on the seas. And as I just said, it's not like her kids will be coming back to claim Driftmark anytime soon. So does it really matter? And while we're on the topic of marriage, we do need to ask this other question. Who does Rhaenyra marry in this new timeline? Since Daemon took the Stepstones and never came back, Rhaenyra never got in trouble with him. Her tour was never cut short, and more than that, she wasn't forced to marry Laenor and probably won't be now that they're aligned with Daemon. Honestly, there is no telling who Rhaenyra would marry, but assuming she never gets out of line like she did in canon, it's very likely that Viserys still allows her to keep the ability to choose who she wants to marry. Knowing young Rhaenyra, she tends to do what she wants versus what's politically sound. Though there may be concerns with Daemon amassing power in the Stepstones, and people would definitely be pushing for her to marry into a prominent family to garner more support for the crown, I doubt Rhaenyra will do this. Considering how things went in canon, we'll say Rhaenyra chooses to marry Sir Harwin Strong, since he's the one she chose as her lover during her marriage to Laenor. Clearly, they had a bond during those times, so we'll assume they have that same bond here. The heir to Harrenhal will marry the heir to the throne. This will make their children legitimate, so no rumors of bastardy will be going around, though the dance might still happen eventually with people like Otto still roaming around, though I do imagine Alicent may or may not go for this, because if Rhaenyra never compromises her image and makes herself seem untrustworthy through her escapades with Daemon and Criston Cole, and doesn't sire any bastard children, they'll have a better relationship, and Alicent most likely won't poison her kids against them. Otto, who would still be around in this timeline, may still try to groom Aegon into a king regardless of what his mother wants. Either way, a lot could happen if Daemon decided to stay in the Stepstones and made a kingdom unbound to Westeros and its rules, focused on Valyrian custom and capitalizing and profiting on trade or whatever else he decides to do. But those are just my thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.